Practice run. We won't go more than half an hour. We'll keep it. Welcome to the Presbyterian Heritage Center, Treasures from the Attic. We have a few people with us here today, and we have those online. And we like to point out that museums have thousands of artifacts and items that have been donated or acquired over the decades. And some of those never see the light of day, or only rarely see the light of day. So what we wanted to do is to go over some of our activities in mission areas and show you some of the artifacts and archives that we have and answer any questions you might have. And we also will cover missions, a little bit of the Civil War, and we'll also cover some Montreat history. The first thing, which sort of blends Montreat and missions, is this broadside. And this broadside was printed in 1898 by Charles Rowland, who was a Presbyterian out of Athens, Georgia. Now, this is done by the Southern Presbyterian Church at the time, and Rowlands was president of the Sunday School Missionary Society and did this poster talking about trying to get people to volunteer to become missionaries to Africa. Now, Charles Rowland was one of there were 2 Presbyterians in the original 15 incorporators of the Mountain Retreat Association. And it was multi-denominational in the beginning from 1897 to about 1907, when the Presbyterians basically took over running of the operation. Well, Charles Rowland was one of the original incorporators. He was on the original executive committee. So you can tell that at the same time, he was also running this Sunday school mission effort on behalf of the Presbyterian Church in the U.S. And he was basically concerned about various problems. And it's interesting that under the items he was concerned about was missionaries to Sudan and Central Africa. Closed doors regarded the weakness of the Protestant missionary effort in Islamic countries. And it's still one of the issues today, 125 years later. The other thing is liquor traffic, and this goes on to talk, this is the time of temperance, and it's the liquor traffic, a mighty power of evil. Gin has become the currency of the country. The slave trade is still the great open store of the country. And I think it's pretty interesting. And that is an item that we acquired. We get items that we inherited from the beginning of the foundation of the Historical Foundation Heritage Center. We have items donated to us, and we have a very small budget that we can go acquire things. Well, this came up in 2011, and I had never seen it before. We didn't have much information about it other than it was Charles Rowland, and we used a little bit of our money and went to eBay and successfully bought it. It comes with an envelope and a letter. So it really was, I think, a key acquisition for us. Now, other African things we've received have been donations, and most of them come through William Henry Shepard. William Henry Shepard was one of the first Black missionaries for the old Southern Church. He and Samuel Norris Lapsley went to the Congo in 1890. And what happened is they set it up as an equal effort. It's one of the few times when the mission field, Black and white missionaries got paid the same, had equal say in the running of the mission station, etc. Samuel Lapsley ended up dying from fever after they had been there only a couple of years. And therefore, Shepard stepped in and ran the mission for about 15 years by himself. And one of the things that William Henry Shepard did was start collecting artifacts. And he was one of the first people to collect artifacts from the Congo. And this is a shield that's basically out of wood and plant material. And it's one of his collections. So we know that this was probably old in 1892. So it's over 130 years old. And the Shepard collection is important because he was one of the first collectors of African crafts, art, everyday items. And here is, for example, a Bakuban, which is a broadsword, and it had a handle on the end of it. And this was more ceremonial, but it could be used, and some of them were used for work, construction, and hacking wood and other kinds of things to build houses, etc. But he also collected cultural artifacts besides just everyday living. And here is an atamwa, or it's a friction oracle. You'd go to the witch doctor and a question would be asked. And while the question was being asked, the little stylus plug on the top would be rubbed on the back. And this shows a crocodile, which was an important figure in the Cuba, Congo area. And the questions would be, and this is Shepard's words, the diviner rubs the button-like attachment over the back of the animal. If it sticks, the person in question is guilty, otherwise innocent. The crocodile never lies, is the native saying. So, for example, you could say, are you ill? Are you suffering? Or do you have a headache or whatever? And this would sort of do it. What people don't realize is that Shepard's collection, which he later gave to Hampton Institute and some of it to us, influenced modern art, because there was a showing in Paris about 1906. And attending the showing of African art was Picasso, Matisse, and other early Cubists. So the Cubism movement in the late 1906, 7, 8 basically sprung from African art. And you can see some of the pictures showing, you can compare them to the African sculptures, and you can see where that came from. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Shepard serves in the Congo and charges the Belgian king, Leopold, with atrocities with natives. And the result was, what was happening is they were doing rubber. And this was natural rubber you had to harvest because synthetic rubber hadn't been invented yet. Leopold had thugs. And so William Henry Shepard went national and international with publicity about this. He was sued for libel by this Kasai company. And basically, he won and was deemed not liable. Well, this caused such a stir, and it had international backing to support him, that basically King Leopold lost control of the Congo, and the Belgian government came in and took it over. So he's an interesting guy, and he later comes to Montreat to visit as they're talking about restructuring the mission station in the about 1910, 1911. So there's a Montreat connection and many things here. This is a Masambu, which is a book, and this is printed by the John Layton printing press, which is run by Presbyterian missionaries. And I just thought I'd pass that on if you want to take a look at it. It doesn't have music attached to it, but it's got the words to psalms and other kinds of songs. And of course, back then, they would know the tunes and people would play them, and then you just add the words to the tunes. But that's a pretty interesting. And we have one of the larger African cultural collections, both missionary related as well as non-missionary related in the country. And it was a huge, as a matter of fact, the largest church in the Presbyterian Southern Church about 1920 was actually a church in Congo, not in the US or in the Southeast states. Let me show you something from Hollywood. It's like, how does that connect with Montree? Fred Thompson grew up as the son of a Presbyterian minister, and he was born in California. He was also an athlete, and a very good athlete. He did the decathlon, 10 events. He was invited to attend the 1912 Olympic Games in Stockholm as a decathlon athlete, and he turned them down because he went to Princeton Theological Seminary, where he was studying to become a Presbyterian minister. And he did so, went back to California to run a church in Nevada. He had gotten married, his wife died, and he's sort of at loose ends. And then America entered the war, the Great War, World War I in 1917. Well, he became appointed chaplain. And this is a picture of him being chaplain of this World War I group at their training camp in California. And one of the people in the picture was a special liaison to the group. It was Mary Pickford, America's sweetheart actress. And this is a picture of the 6'3" Fred Thompson and Mary Pickford. Now, Mary Pickford was already married to Douglas Fairbanks, but she had along with her a good friend, Frances Marion. Frances Marion was a female movie director in the silent era and in the early talkie era. And she also became a screenwriter. Well, she won Oscars and got Oscar nominations for her efforts. Well, Frances Marion and Fred Thompson got married about 1919 after the war was over. And Fred decided not to go back to Hollywood, to the ministry, but his wife convinced him to get in front of a camera. And Fred Thompson, without a P, is the guy in the white hat. This is a movie lobby card poster. And this is for one of his Westerns, The Two-Gun Man. Now, Fred Thompson became very popular during the mid and late 1920s, silent era still. The two most popular box office draws was Fred Thompson and Tom Mix. Now, you've heard of Tom Mix because he lived into the sound era and that silent to sound transition. So he's got some movies that are out there in sound movies. And Fred Thompson didn't. Fred Thompson died in 1928. And it's a sad story that he stepped on a nail in his stables. He got infected. They didn't realize it. It was tetanus. He had lockjaw, and he died on Christmas Day, 1928. So that's why you don't know. But I think Fred Thompson is important because there's not too many Presbyterian ministers that became Hollywood movie stars. The other thing that's sort of an interesting association with Fred Thompson is that when he went into making Westerns, he was hired by the FBO company, which was the film booking office. Now, running the film booking office was someone called Joseph P. Kennedy, who had two young sons who went with him to Hollywood in 1924. And 6-year-old Jack Kennedy met his favorite Western Hollywood movie star, Fred Thompson. So that's a pretty interesting connection to Hollywood and to the future president of the United States. And I will pass this around if you want to take a closer look at it. Now, the movie poster was something the Presbyterian Heritage Center went out and acquired. We knew about Fred Thompson. We need to have artifacts, and it was something that we could go and do, and it was cost efficient. If you come this summer, you'll see out in the Native American and Presbyterians exhibit looking at 350 years of history, there's a sign hanging off of the wall. And if you look at it closely, it says Pine Ridge Presbyterian Indian Mission. Well, that's Pine Ridge, South Dakota, site of the Wounded Knee Massacre. And the Presbyterians had a mission there. And this mission started about 1887. So they were there when Wounded Knee occurred in 1890. The people who, the Sioux Indians, the Oglala tribes, etc., that were there, some of them were at the mission. They weren't involved with the massacre. They weren't involved with some of the things going on with the ghost dances, etc. But that sign came up for auction at the West Cowan auction house in Ohio. Now, West Cowan is the man who shows up on Antiques Roadshow. Okay, yeah. He also did the History Detective show. And that would be noisy. It was offered for a price that was well out of our budget. So we waited until the auction was over. And then I called the Cowan auction and talked to him and said, I'd like to get a hold of whoever the owner of the sign is, because we're going to do an exhibit and I would like to borrow the artifact. Well, the owner of the artifact called about 10 days later, said, I understand you want to do something with it, and explain. I told her we were doing this exhibit and who we were, and we're a 501c3 museum and legitimate, etc. Well, this person said, yeah, I'd be happy to loan it to you. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to find a good home for it that'll be cared for and honored and protected. Would you like to have it donated to you? And we did a happy dance and said, yes. And then they added icing on the cake that day. They said, we'll even pay for shipping. So they did. So it's a great piece. It's fairly unique. We think it is circa 1892, 1890. So it could have been on the mission station when the Wounded Knee Massacre was there, but clearly the Presbyterian mission was there. And it probably dates from sometime in the circa 1890s. We also have acquired a couple other things related to the Civil War. When the Civil War sesquicentennial occurred in 2011, we decided to do an exhibit. Well, we're not a battle history museum. So people said, what are you going to do? I said, well, we're going to do chaplains. There were Confederate and Union chaplains. There were hospital chaplains during the war. And we want to do chaplains. And we got two interesting artifact related to chaplains. This one you're not going to be able to see at home, but I'll pass it around. This is for a pay voucher. This is like turning in your timesheet to get paid in 1864. And it's signed by a Michael J. Kramer, who was appointed by President Abraham Lincoln to the hospital. It's just outside of Louisville, to be the hospital chaplain. And he served in that role until 1867. The thing about Michael J. Kramer that people don't necessarily know about is this is the brother-in-law of Ulysses S. Grant. And after he finished being he was a Methodist. He served as a Methodist minister for 4 years before becoming a hospital chaplain. And only the Methodists had more chaplains than Presbyterians in the war. And that was partially because there were more Methodist ministers to choose from. You didn't have to go to a theological seminary if you were a Methodist or a Baptist, but Presbyterians required you to go to college and to go to and graduate from a theological seminary. So there were just less Presbyterian ministers to select from. But that was, I think, an interesting thing. And after 1867, he becomes a diplomat. He is sent to Leipzig. He becomes the ambassador to Denmark, the ambassador to Switzerland, and eventually passes away in the I want to say in the 1890s. But that's our Ulysses S. Grant connection. The other one was Joseph Warren. Now, I happened to be trolling eBay and found this picture of Joseph Warren, and it said chaplain. And you want to zoom in as close as you can. And how did you take a look at it? Well, I had to go find out more information about it. And the back of the if you flip over the back of it, you will see it's done by a photographer in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Well, we had to do some research, and I did research, and I said, I have to have this card. And as far as we know, it may be the only picture of Joseph Warren. And the reason for that is Joseph Warren was born in 1809. He graduates and becomes a Presbyterian minister and basically serves until the 1840s or 50s. Then he becomes a missionary to India. So he moves to India, which includes India and Pakistan today. But he moves to India and basically serves some 20 years as a Presbyterian missionary to India. He comes back in 1854 and does some churches in the upper Midwest. When war breaks out, he offers and becomes a chaplain to U.S. Army military units. And he becomes one first to the Missouri and the 26th Missouri Infantry and serves for them. And then the following year in 1864, he becomes chaplain to the all-black 64th Colored Infantry that was put together by the Union to help fight. And he serves through the war. In 1866, after the war is over, he becomes supervisor of the Freedmen's Bureau in Mississippi, stationed at Vicksburg, which is probably when that picture was made. And the Freedmen's Bureau basically set up schools for freed Black slave children and adults, and would take care of helping them in the transition to freedom. Included in that was they would sometimes marry recently freed Black slaves or freed Blacks who had participated in the 64th Colored Infantry Troop, etc. Well, Harper's Ferry in June 30th, 1866, shows a marriage of a color soldier at Vicksburg by Chaplain Warren of the Freedmen's Bureau. And so this is a pretty interesting story that we put together. It started with just this eBay image of Joseph Warren. And if you look at it, there he is, and there's the scenario. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. Later in, and we acquired that in 2011. So we had him among other Southern and Northern Army chaplains. As far as I know, that's a pretty unique combination of things. Okay, we've got two more things to go over real quick. And this is something that normally I have one of our other registrars do, but she's not here. This is a doll that dates back to a China doll, made in China. Hold it carefully. It dates back about 120 years. It was done sometime between 1907 and 1912. And it was done by the Door of Hope Mission, which was a mission in Shanghai for women. And this has cloth hands, bound feet, and it's very rare. And you can take a look at it. There's the box it goes back into. But we have a collection of these things. And someone wrote a book about 3-4 years ago, and we will, since we own the artifacts, we tracked her down. She came over here, gave us a briefing, so we now have her book in our library. And this is a Door of Hope mission. This is post 1912, probably about 1915, 16, and this is a farmer.
Cool.
And you can see the face is just a little bit different with the rare one versus this one. But this was a mission for women. They would obviously do these dolls as a fundraising effort, and they did the dolls from about 1900 to about the late 1930s, when China basically became involved in what would become World War II, because the Japanese invaded China in the late 1930s. And so we have a whole set of these that we'll have a display one day, but it's the kind of thing that it's too good to be hidden away in the attic. And now we have someone's research that they've done on all of these. When we first were finding this, we had copies, and there were very few spread out, one or two at different facilities. But we have, I think, over maybe a dozen. So it's something that we will do an exhibit on. Now, the last thing in Montreat history for today is was donated by people. And this was, by the way, was part of the collection that a missionary had donated earlier. And we have the Historical Foundation News, which is a newsletter done beginning about 1946. And that's an issue from one of those early years. And it keeps us with information as to when people acquired things for the old historical foundation of the Presbyterian and Reformed churches. Someone cleaning their house, which is good. We're known as the people to call before you throw anything away. Found Montreat Weekly News from the 1940s and just before the war in the 1941. And they do things from auditorium and a collegiate club presents a play, leadership school opens. Here is Barnhouse brings initial, collegians present annual benefit play in 1940. This is July the 7th. And so what we do is, these are extremely valuable, particularly for this time period, because not many copies survived, and we have added greatly to our collection. And so we find different things being announced, and it helps us with our research and what's going on. Can I answer any questions you all may have about any of these items?
I missed what this is.
This is a shield.
Shield. Okay.
And we've got a picture on our website, I think of, and we had it in the picture in the, and maybe we can add the picture in this video when we do the editing. We show Sarah Stiegel, a very short little Presbyterian woman from Cuba, standing beside two tall, 6'1.5" Congolese warriors with their spears. And they include, one of them has a shield very similar to this.
I thought that must be, but it's so thin.
It's very thin and very narrow. Yeah. No.
They weren't overweight either.
No.
This is so funny to me, as in like the weather.
Yes.
Like, you know, like when it's humid, it's gonna stick, but that means you are a liar.
Yes.
And then why was the lady in that one picture called named Colonel? Yeah.
Because that was an honorific title that was added to Mary Pickford. she came out to visit the troops at a California training camp. So they said, well, you'll become the colonel of this particular infantry brigade. And so that's why they called her Colonel Pickford, meeting with Lieutenant Chaplain
Yes.
Fred Thompson.
I've heard